Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. My guest today is Randy Burgess. He's currently the VP of Technology at MPI Media Group. Previously, he worked as a senior engineering manager at Shipwell and Hireoogy, as well as a coding bootcamp instructor at Northwestern University. Randy shares his non-traditional approach for interviewing technical candidates, shares tips for overcoming interview anxiety, and we talk about a number of other interesting interview-related topics.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to introduce you, it's Randy Burgess currently working as the VP of Technology at MPI Media Group, based here in Chicago. Formerly worked at Hireoogy and Shipwell, and then a number of years ago actually taught as a instructor at a coding bootcamp based out of Northwestern University.
Yes, exactly.
Did I miss anything?
That is it. That's the most important stuff, I'd say.
Great. Cool. Well, could you share a little bit about your current role and kind of what you and your team do now?
Yeah. I mean, right now I'm with a company. I've been here on full time about a week. I've worked with this company over the last decade in contractor roles. My first job with them was I was a hands-on software engineer with a consulting outfit called DevMind at the time, and now what is their name now? I've already forgotten. But they're in Chicago.
Or Tandem, maybe. I think they've changed a couple times. I can't remember either.
They'll shoot me if I don't find it out again. But
I can put it in the show notes.
Tandem.
That's
what it is now. Look up, if you want to search them up, just look up JC Grubbs, the founder, and that's who you'll find. But the Tandem is the name of the company now. And so MPI was a client of DevMind. I worked on a project with them. As Tandem DevMind evolved, they kind of quit working with MPI, and MPI asked DevMind, hey, can we continue working with me? So nice. I worked with them on a contracting basis. I had my own agency for a little while and worked with them. And then eventually they came to me with some other bigger projects. And I just said, like, I can't do all this stuff for you part-time. Like, it's just not cost effective. And we kind of came to a conclusion that, hey, full-time might be the best route to go. So right now I don't have a team per se. I don't have a group of engineers like I worked with at Shipwell. The previous role, I had a team of, 25 people, engineers and stuff. And then at Hireoogy, maybe it was 15 across two teams. It was a handful. So yeah. So now, like, my role, like at Hireoogy and Shipwell, I was in 9 to 5 Zoom meetings. Both were remote roles. I was either in Chicago or Kansas City now, and now it's much more of a less meeting, more get stuff done, and we are at the very beginning of this really large project list that we're trying to prioritize and scope out. And then from there, we'll find out, do we need to hire individuals, contracting versus full-time versus like what's the best, or hire a consulting firm, build versus buy. We're looking at all the options. So right now it's pretty much in a assessment mode in the first week. In addition to me just doing hands-on code again, because I've got projects that they still want to get done faster, and I can focus on that.
Yeah, nice. Have you done? It sounds like this role was a pre-existing relationship, right? So I'm assuming there wasn't a formal technical interview process. No. Have you done technical interviews for yourself, or when you were at Shipwell, when you were hiring as well recently?
Yeah, well, Shipwell does technical interviews. I I did not conduct the technical ones. I did participate in technical interview in a technical interview with Shipwell. Hireoogy did not do the one, if I remember. And then for the there were technical interviews that folks either put me through or tried to. Because I'll say it up front. Most technical interviews are BS.
Yeah.
And I have a very strong opinion on the industry's interviewing approach and the great divide between what people assess in a technical interview and what a person's actual job in the role actually is.
Sure.
And like, why would you test people on a level of detail or in a direction that doesn't actually judge what they would do the day they walk in? And I find that to be one, it puts all the people looking for work in a bad spot. They're focusing on the wrong things. They're not building skills. They're building testing, get past test technique, kind of like getting into college and SAT testing. It's like, does the SAT score really reflect what you're going to be learning when you get there? Yeah. But if you're an employer, the job you're looking to I need to assess if this person can get the job done. Mm-hmm. And when oftentimes, almost every time I've been in a technical interview or asked to do one, I'm like, this doesn't judge what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I go a different direction if I'm conducting the interview. And now I'm at the point in my career, and this is definitely privilege of experience, title, what have you. I just say, no, I'm not doing it anymore. Like, don't waste my time with it. And there's times that I just don't even get the opportunity to talk to a company, which is totally fine. And there are times when they say, you know what, we agree with what you just, like, they ask me why, I like to explain why. And they're like, that actually makes sense. Let me talk to someone. Let's see if we can punt it. And I found that the companies that punt it actually are the ones that are the most flexible with thinking about, maybe what we're doing here isn't right or can be improved. And there are more companies I want to work with. The companies that are very rigid, is in all cases, I really don't want to work there anyway, because you'll find yourself following somebody else's workflow and stuff that has no bearing on other things you're supposed to do, and you're always beholden to it. And it's like, yeah. So it's like, it's not like I'm not saying to people that are in kind of your audience, which are probably younger, less experienced folks, hey, take my attitude and you'll do well, because they don't have kind of that outlet that I have to stand up and go, I'm not doing this. This is stupid. Part of the process of getting into a company is jumping through the hoops they put you through. Yeah. And I'm not trying to say that people should just do that or try to skip it, because the problem is when you don't have work, it's chicken or the egg. How do you get experience if you're not working somewhere? Right. So part of the balance is teaching the people doing the interview, like that are conducting interviews and hiring, you need to change how you do this system. While on the other hand, hey, if you're trying to get work, what's the best way to prepare and still go through the gauntlet, because you can't avoid it. Yeah. And I'm just in a position where I can avoid it, but that doesn't mean everyone can. I don't ever want to make the assumption that everyone can just do what I do now. 20 years in the industry, it just doesn't work that way for a lot of folks.
Yeah. So as an interviewer, when you are interviewing someone, if you're going a different route than a traditional technical, right? What are you evaluating for when you're speaking with someone? Say, maybe early career and also maybe more mid-level or more senior.
I mean, this kind of goes with everybody for what I'm hiring them for, but aptitude and attitude, top two things. Integrity and other values definitely fit in there, but those are the top two things I'm looking for: aptitude and attitude. Meaning, aptitude to me is, I don't care if you know every technical thing that the role needs.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know that in technology, in the field that my company's in, that our team is working in, that you have an aptitude, meaning you run into a problem, you can get past it, you can learn past it, you can build your skills up. There are people that you introduce them to brand new technology. You see it in a boot camp scenario, you see it in a new job. They hit a wall, they can't get past it, or they either don't have the ability to, or they don't really want to. It's like when you put a brand new Mac in front of my mom, she'd be like, I have no Windows, I don't want to do this. It's like her aptitude for Mac is not there. Her aptitude for Windows, she's got enough of a history, she can work her way through it. It's no different when you introduce someone that's trying to get into technology and they stare at a screen versus they start Googling things, they start hacking on things, they test things. It may take them an hour, but they'll get past that little bug because they have an aptitude around technology for improving, learning, solving problems.
Yeah.
So that's one strong aspect I'm looking for when I'm interviewing someone at a junior level, because they just don't, like, at a junior level, they don't have the technology experience that's going to match the role. Like, the whole idea is I'm hiring them to learn up and move into that spot. So aptitude is by far the strongest thing I can look for to see, can they go from point A to Z, which is where I want them to be in a few months after I hire them. Attitude is, can you fit in with our team? Do you have the attitude that fits a core value? Like, the best core value of any company I've been at is the no asshole core value that Hireoogy has.
Yeah.
And they're very strong on it. I remember when I interviewed the CTO, that was the one thing he stressed the most to me. And it was definitely a factor when you got there. Assholes weren't tolerated, and they didn't have any. Like, I really didn't run into people that were assholes at Hireoogy. Shipwell had a similar one that was unofficial called No Jerks, and they really did a good job. We didn't have those type of attitudes. We had people that were willing to help each other, patient with each other, optimistic for the most part, as optimistic as they could be, and just kind of cool to work with. Just like nothing excitable, just more chill. And that attitude is what you want for someone who you're asking to come in and learn, because they're going to get frustrated. They're going to have to reach out for help. And attitude is a big part of that, of how do you handle different people, different personalities? How do you handle the problems that are put in front of you that you don't have answers for? How do you deal with the stress that you have from just normal work environment? How do you work with managers that have to give you priorities that may not fit exactly what you want to do, but we need to all get them done together? That's what I'm looking for on the attitude side. So when I take those two factors at a junior, less experienced level, I typically find that everything else works out. I just don't need to judge specifically. Do you know what hoisting is in JavaScript? Can you explain how to map over a collection of data right this second in front of me in a nervous situation? Can you, or whatever these stupid sort bubble crap tests are. Like, none of that matters, because you know what I'm going to do if you put that in front of me as a 20-year vet? I want to Google, how do you do in this language?
Yeah.
Like, no one memorizes that stuff. And if they do, great for them. But most people, that's not what I'm looking for. I don't want junior engineers that just memorize a bunch of leak code things and read the cracking the interview books just to get in the door. Like, it's smart to do that. It's the hoop you have to jump through for a lot of jobs, but that's not what I want to hire on. I want to hire people with that aptitude and attitude component. At the senior level, as people move up that I'm hiring for more senior roles, I want to know more about their leadership and management experience. And those are the scenarios. Like, instead of aptitude for just tech, it's like aptitude for empathy. What level of empathy do you have with people? How do you deal with stress with people? Those kind of things. But again, and then at the technical level for a senior person, I'm really going to find out more about them when they talk about projects they've been on, and when they run, like how they get, like I have discussions with them about things they've accomplished, and then references. And there's this weird thing in the industry now where people the hardest thing as an interviewer is talking to strange. Like, this might be a human thing. No one wants to talk to strangers.
Sure.
It's like calling up random folks and talking to them about potentially stressful things. And if your whole work life as a manager is meetings, it's like adding 4 or 5 meetings for a candidate to your schedule. It's not immediately like joyful tasks. But if you really want to know if the person you're hiring is a risky candidate or going to fulfill what you need, you want to talk to people that can speak to their work before.
Sure.
Because they can tell you in a very short time, rather than a 30-minute to 1 hour or a half-day take-home test. Can this person code as you needed them to? Can they manage people like you needed them to? And there's this attitude that's gone through this. HR tells me we can't answer those things. We can only say BS. It's total BS. If you ask a candidate, give me a reference, you can find out really quick if a reference is just friend of a friend pumping them up. Or, hey, I can speak to the fact in like a 10-minute conversation, this person is great. I wish I could keep them. I wish, 22 years ago, we could have kept them then. They did everything we needed. They were great with the team. They got through all these things.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know why they put me on this list. We didn't have the greatest experience with them. That's all I really want to say. Okay, I hear you.
Yeah.
But it's very rare that you don't get, like, I'm not going to call up HR, like the HR department of a company that someone worked at. I'm like, don't give me that person unless you really think they can speak to me. It's, give me the names of managers you've worked for, and they can be good experiences. I don't need to have you give me people you didn't like working with. Like that's not what I need. I'm looking on the optimistic level. Give me the names of people that can vouch for your work and projects you worked on with them. I can ask them the questions to find out, are they blowing smoke up my butt, or are they going to tell me the real deal? And that's where I really, like, it skips everybody's time making a senior engineer waste time on coding tests. And it gets me to the point of, if I hire this person, is there a good likelihood that they will succeed here?
Yeah.
And I mean, almost I can't think of a time that I didn't get past the aptitude and attitude assessment, liked them a lot, and then I got references that countered that. I've just never really seen it. But if you want to like really verify, can this person code in a business scenario that I need them to, you talk to people they've worked with before.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be like, I've hired folks at a junior level and talked to previous managers of theirs about scenarios they were in their jobs. Because again, I'm assessing on aptitude and attitude. So I'm going to ask their references about those type of things. How they deal with stress. How do they deal with other people on their team? And I get enough answers to know if this person applies themselves here like they did in this non-technical role at another place, the likelihood of them succeeding is great.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm making the bet on. I don't need to bat 100 on every hire. I'd say I'm batting about 90% over my career. I just haven't made a lot of bad hires. I've made hires where over time they didn't like doing that job, or they wanted to do something else, or my company couldn't pay more. So time went on and they moved on. But I've really done pretty well with, I need to hire for this role. Is this person a good fit? And it comes down to networking, which is another big component I would put on here for juniors. But networking, aptitude and attitude, references.
Yeah.
Those 4 things. And if you're a lazy ass manager and don't want to do those things, references, kick that out. And networking, kick that out, and just hand everything to the HR department to hand you candidates, and then you go put them through a ringer. Okay, then you'll have a lazy process for hiring that will likely not hit a 90% mark on successful hires. But if you, a manager, realize that your the number one thing that you can do for a team is hire exceptional people.
Yeah.
You'll actually put that time in and realize that if you spend 8 to 16 hours on each role or each person that you've brought in successfully, they will do so much for your team that you have the time to do all that.
Yeah.
But if all you do is hire bad people because you go let the HR department do it for you, like just by themselves, then yeah, you're going to be busy as crap managing mediocre people. Like it kind of there's a cause and effect here.
I think that's why so many.
Has this rant gone on long enough?
No, it's great.
I don't know.
I think that lower hit ratio is why so many people have those arbitrary text screens too, because they go, well, if they can reverse a tree, then they reverse a linked list, and they must be able to do the job we need, right? And I'm not going to do all the rest of those things to figure it out, right? So
yeah.
Or if they're hiring, once in a while I do see, if you're hiring at massive scale, right, it is difficult to do all of those things because like your network does eventually run out versus if you're hiring maybe even 25 people a year, right? That's a lot. Once you get above that, I think it does get harder and harder. So then you see more of those arbitrary screens, but I think there's still certainly better options, right? And at scale, hopefully you could scale that across your team, right? Like, can I get other people involved who are also networking and also involving references, right? So you can scale that to some extent. Right?
Yeah, so that's the point you make is good. As you scale and you have to hire tons of people, what can one person do?
Yeah.
But the truth is you, as a manager, you have other people working with you. Mm-hmm. It's your job to teach them how to interview and conduct the hiring process like you need them to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you just tell, like at a previous role, we would bring in candidates and they were getting just hammered by certain engineers on algorithm tests. Mm-hmm. Now, I said day one, if we kick this test out, I won't cry. Like I think this is a waste of time. And we had good candidates getting booted, or we had good candidates that were getting huge marks on aptitude, attitude by the people that interviewed them on less technical things. And then the technical interview would just completely destroy them. And I'm like, I don't know. I got a really good assessment of this person's technical ability, but let's find out what the interviewers are asking them. And I was just like, this is not testing them on what we need them to do. So then we went to the engineer and said, why are you doing it this way? He's like, this is how I did it at my last company, and this is what I was told to do here. I'm like, oh, hold on. Stop that.
Yeah.
Change. Let's have some empathy for these people in the role they're in. Like, a lot of engineers, in my assessment, have forgot, like, as soon as they get on the other side of the interview table, they forget what it was like before.
Sure. Yeah.
Empathy is understanding the emotional aspect of the people on the other side. And you can teach that. You can tell the folks that, as you're scaling your interview team, think about the position they're in. Like, we have people that we'd be putting people through 4 hours of interviews, and I go into the interview and I'm like, hey, do you need a break? Do you need water? And they're like, thanks for asking. I need to use the bathroom. I'm like, what did the last 3 people ask you? And they're like, nobody asked. I'm like, that's just ridiculous. There's a very, like, it's up to you as the manager, as a person that knows what someone's going through on the other side, to teach your team how to be good interviewers, how to be graceful, to how to understand the emotional impact that these folks interviewing are going through. So can you scale it? Yes. Does it take work? Hell yeah, it takes work. But there's no excuse. In my mind, I don't care if you're at IBM, not IBM, that's a horrible example. I don't care if you're at Facebook or any FANG company or any company of huge scale. If you are if you're the manager that needs to put these people on your team, it behooves you to work with the people that are part of your interview process to understand how you want them to work, to embrace what you know to be the best way to treat interviewees and the best way to have a process that actually gets to that point. And I don't think that you can just, if you're at a company and your attitude is, well, there's just too many candidates, we just have to weed them out. I'm like, okay, that's that's just not a company I want to work at myself.
Yeah.
But I just don't think that there's any excuse for it. Like, hiring is part of a manager leader's job, and to make that like one of your lowest priorities is almost counterintuitive to, like, how do you want your team to be successful in the first place?
Right.
So I just don't take when things scale, you can't network and you exhaust your network. If you got scale at that level, your network should be mushrooming. It should be getting bigger and bigger. Because when I go to the engineers on my team and go, who do you know? I don't have to know them. Like, my network does not include everyone I personally know. I looked at LinkedIn. I have the 2-degree contacts all over the place.
Right.
Like, that is part of my network, whether I know them or not, whether I can reach out and go, do you want to work with me again? It's more of, do you want to work with the junior engineer I hired?
Yeah.
Who I'm 3 degrees from them because I haven't connected to them on LinkedIn, but their people are part of my network too. So when you scale and get bigger and you're trying to hire a greater number of people, you should think of your network as also getting exponentially scaling at the same time. And LinkedIn just simply brought that to our attention on a more data-driven level, I think.
It's an indication too of how strong your team is, and also how much they enjoy working there, right? Because every place I've worked in the past that I really truly enjoyed, I tried to bring people in, right? Where I said, we got to interview so and so, and we got to get so and so on board. Versus places where I was, a little unsure. Maybe if they ask explicitly, who do you know, I might go, you should reach out to so and so. But if they ask me, I'm gonna go, it's fine. Like, maybe not my favorite place, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you have a standardized system that you're using when you're talking about aptitude and attitude? Like, is it, I ask these 5 questions every single time, or I have some type of rubric that I'm working through, or does that change depending on kind of the person and the role?
Every time I've had yes, I've had a system. And then after 2 questions, it falls apart, meaning the person takes either one, I figure out really quick, this is a waste of our time, which I'm not one to take an interview all to the whole 30 minutes when it just seems like this person doesn't want to answer questions. This person doesn't feel like they need to explain specifics of the questions I'm asking. I'm just like, oh, do you have any questions for me? Like if I do that within 10 minutes of the interview going on, you'll know that things aren't going well. But what I look for is people to take me on a ride, so to speak. When I start asking questions about experience and projects, I just want us to start riffing on what you've laid out at the beginning. And I find that I get really good examples of work experience, problem solving, teamwork, how you interact with people and communication. And I just kind of take it from there. I don't feel this need, like every little question I have needs to be answered by me asking it. Mm-hmm. Like almost every time I'm in an interview where the preliminary kind of processes of like getting to know the person is going, they fill in the blanks because we're along the way talking about projects and stuff. So I just don't have, again, I know a lot of companies want, or a lot of managers want, they teach the recruiting by just saying, hey, you walk into this interview with a person you don't know for a role you barely are familiar with. This is how it has to work because we're all busy. Ask these questions and answer these things. But I just don't, I just don't approach it like that. I'm probably not an HR manager's dream in that case, but that's just like, for me, I always have an approach that I do with juniors that is way different than seniors. Mm-hmm. And I start looking at resumes and start asking questions, and then we just kind of take it from there.
Yeah, great. I like that. And I think the idea of it being more conversational too, especially if it's sharing some about themselves up front, and then that kind of segues into the rest of the conversation. It emphasizes how important it is to be able to tell your story and to be able to kind of summarize, what are you about? What are you interested in doing, right? What have you done in the past? And I feel like that's a skill that, people, when they're thinking about interviewing, they go, oh, it's technical. I got to do all my leak code stuff. And then someone says, well, tell me about your last job. And they go, I wrote software for a website, or wrote software, right, in this industry. And they can't tell you a story, right? And I used to, when I was at Actualize, focus a lot on like, can you tell someone like, how did you get to where you are now, and then what you want to do going forward, right? And if you can, if you've done enough research about the company, how does that align with what the company's interested in, right? And like, at least that puts you in the right spot. You might still bomb the technical, but at least they'll go, oh, we like this person, right? Like they seem to, like, they could be a good person who would work here in the future, right? Even if they're not ready right now, right? At least that puts you in the right starting spot.
So here's what this is kind of a quasi answer to your, do you have a list of questions? When I talk to a junior, I look at the biggest problem for juniors, and they all run into it. I know it's a common thing. They've got the projects they worked on at their boot camp, or how they were learning to move into the industry. Or they have one initial, like, I was an intern and this is what I worked on. And there's a lot of managers that just punt that stuff. They're like, I don't care about those. They're projects. We don't work on projects here. We work on important business things. And I'm like, okay, I understand the attitude that a boot camp project, 'cause I taught these things. I know a boot camp project is massively different than a work business project. But they're, again, going after the aptitude thing. I started out the wrong approach. I would go through and look at the 3 or 4 projects someone had from a boot camp and go, tell me about this project. Tell me about that project. The problem is that the answers I was getting would go into, well, the professor or the instructor set us up for this. And that could be like a 15-minute conversation on a project. I'm like, okay, stop. I had to basically say, all right, this is not what I want to ask you. Give me one thing you learned in each of these. And you don't have longer than 5 minutes for all of them. We got to get through all of them. All of a sudden, boom, the person would look at the project and they go, I learned how to how to write an API that connected to a database. This one, I didn't learn much. I got stuck on this one thing. And, then they kind of go into where they got stuck. And I start saying, well, why did you get stuck? Why didn't you do this or that? And then they would explain like why they got stuck. But it was an honest conversation that didn't make me like, I love the honesty.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know, can you get unstuck in the future? What did you learn from that? And, and then the third project was I learned how to do, some kind of charting, high charts or something to do reports for that particular project. Well, when they all of a sudden told me 3 things they learned, I learned about aptitude because they go into each project not knowing this stuff. And also, when you do these group projects with a boot camp, you don't get to do everything.
Right.
Sometimes you don't even get to choose what you're doing because somebody was really forceful and goes in and does the fun database stuff or something like that. So my thing is to go in and get engineers talking about things they've learned, problems they run into, how they get past them, how they get over that learning curve. I have a really in-depth technical discussion with them that a lot of managers are kicking out because they don't think that the boot camp projects matter. And I'm like, well, if you're hiring inexperienced engineers, I just don't understand. I don't get that. But you also can't do what I did at the beginning, which is say, tell me about them, because it's too broad. You got to you want to narrow down, be efficient with your time. You need to say to the interviewee, tell me what you learned, one thing. You can't give me 2, one thing. And you'll see it. And then by that time, we're 20 minutes into the interview. And I've learned what I need to know about, okay, how do we go to the next step? And then I'll dive into, how do you problem solve? How do you ask for, do you ask for help? Do you like to work in a closet and by yourself? Like all these different approaches to how do I assess if you can work well with our team. But by getting someone past the point of, well, the instructor set up the project like this or that, which is like irrelevant to me. That's how I typically approach lesser experienced engineers, trying to find out what their aptitude is.
Yeah, I think you actually gave me some great advice when we spoke when I was doing my initial job search. I think I was starting to talk about some projects I'd done, and then later I got into some consulting work, like some basically freelance stuff that I'd started doing. And you said, leave that project stuff behind. Like, that's great, right? It's your bootcamp stuff, but like, you're doing actual paid development work now. Like, focus on that and lead with that. And that changed everything for me. I was like, okay, every conversation I have, like, that's what I'm starting with, right? And it did feel like it took, I don't know, every single conversation I had, especially interviews, went from, okay, well, let me tell you about these projects, and then I'm doing a little bit of this too. Let me start with this. And if we get to this project stuff, that's cool, right? If you really want to know about it, I can tell you about it. But here's what I'm doing that I actually get paid for, right? And I could do for your company. So that was great.
What you have to go for there, like, what is the lesson to be learned from that is interviewers have bias.
Yeah.
And we're now in a society, in a world right now that is really coming to terms with bias. Like flat out racism, all the way to people that consider themselves, I don't have bias, but then just every action behavior they have has an element to it. It's impossible, even for me, to not have bias when I'm talking to people of some kind, especially in an interview level. So if you're a candidate, the discussions you need to be having with your friends that are also candidates at the boot camp level, at the junior level, at the internship level, whatever you're interviewing for, hey, when you go into these interviews, where do you think you're turning, like, where do you see the biases in the interviewers and the interview process? Like, that's what you want. And so I know a little bit because of how I first thought, how I looked at those projects. My cat's kind of flipping out, sorry. But there's a bias against the projects versus real world work.
Yeah.
And I know about that bias, and that's why I was telling you, avoid this bias, avoid this blocker you're going to run into. And if they ask you about it, cool. But that goes for everything. If it's wearing a collared shirt on a video screen, like, do I care if someone wears a collared shirt? No. Have I seen it matter to people? Have I heard other CTOs talk about that they think it matters? Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's ridiculous, but that doesn't matter if you're trying to get the job there. So you talk to people about, hey, do they want my video screen on? Yes. If that company wants the video screen on and you don't, you're going to go right into a bias path with them. So it's really imperative to talk to your network who are also interviewing with you and find out, how are they reacting to you? Now, there's also the factor of things you can't change. Does this company embrace only white dudes? It's a very important thing to know if you are on it, if you're not a white dude. It's a bias that if you need a job, you can't just walk around, but it's good to know if you actually have options and you're like, you know what, I'm going to avoid these companies that diversity doesn't matter to them at all.
Yeah.
And the same goes for women, just like company that only hires men. Like, look at the makeup of their team. So there's all these elements to the companies you choose in the interview process, but by getting ahead of these things, you've got a very short window. Like, that's why I was telling you, you've got a short window to talk about projects. The faster that you get to your discussion to focus on the things that I know there's manager bias around, the faster you'll go around that bend and go, there's going to be another level of bias above that. But you'll find that out from your network, and you'll be able to maneuver faster where you're getting to the point with these folks. So that, I mean, I've been in interviews when I was younger where interviewer asked me one question. I talked the whole time about something that I could just ramble on for days. By the end of the interview, they didn't know anything about me that they needed to ask. It was my fault because I totally just rambled on and on. Now, if I had talked to someone and said, or now you've got these websites that actually talk about the interview process. There is not a situation where you go into an interview that you shouldn't look at a company's Glassdoor or any other interview review kind of sites, whether Indeed or some of these others are doing that, I don't know. But you should do all the research, really look and see in the last 6 months, what are the people that are going into these interviews before you saying? Now, most of them are negative, and they may be very isolated as to this person didn't like how they were treated in one instance or something. But sometimes you'll get a grasp of, oh, they really care about this.
Yeah.
That's what you want to emphasize. They don't care about this. Don't ramble on too long about it. Like, you're trying to find out, you're trying to navigate a human-based, biased process that may or may not be efficient to get yourself higher up into the candidate list to the point that they like you and they want to hire you. And the best way to navigate it is by asking the people that have gone there before you, or that are, and understand too that all these companies are very much following the same things, very lazy, they're all just copying each other, and you'll find yourself in the same scenarios. It's just really important to like pay attention to the landscape and really see like what's the best way for me to move up this ladder full of the problematic, humanistic, like inefficient processes that they are. And you'll succeed better. You improve your chances of success when you don't go into it cold.
Yeah.
That's
I think interviewing so often is a game, especially early in your career, and even, you know, I think that the middle maybe a lot less, but certainly at the end of your career as well, or the latter half of your career, it's a game of inches sometimes, right? It's like the difference between like, you know, the person who gets hired and who is number 2 in line can sometimes do very small things, right? Especially if we have one role, right? We only have one, and we can only hire one, you know, VP of engineering, or we can only hire one junior engineer this year. Sometimes it's, oh, well, you know, they mentioned this thing that just happens to align with something the CTO likes, and that's the bump that puts them over the other person who is probably just as qualified, right?
yes,
Totally. Any edge you can get is useful, right? Do you have any tips specifically for folks who, you know, aren't in the spot where they're able to kind of step away from technical interviews? If they're preparing for interviews and they know I'm going to have to do technicals, be it take home or whiteboarding, or do you have tips for folks who are going into that situation?
So I don't think it's any different than public speaking. Like if you think about, let's say you're doing a live coding scenario.
Mm-hmm.
The anxiety that people get for doing that is very, very similar to you're about to talk to a bunch of people in a room and give a speech or a presentation.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to alleviate that is to practice it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean practice just the code. That means do it in front of people. Do it. That means get it. Like the way you overcome, like, you know, in an interesting way, the way you overcome public speaking anxiety is to learn to focus on what you're presenting and ignore the silent audience as much as you can. To not look at your, like, if you're the first thing I learned as an instructor in front of a bunch of people was, oh, when I look out, their faces are full of concentration. They look angry. They look like they're bored.
Yeah.
Truth is, they're just trying to like process all this new information I'm giving them. It's not something that smiles come back at you with. So the same thing applies when you're trying to code in front of people. They are focused. They're not going to, one, they probably don't want to be in the room anyway. They got other stuff to do. But the other thing is, they're focused on what you're doing. They're not going to smile at you.
Mm-hmm.
They are trying to, a lot of them are throwing curveballs at you. They want to see you perform. They're looking for gotchas and stuff. But the best thing that you can do is teach yourself to lower your anxiety and focus less on them and more of what's the problem I'm trying to solve here. But you only do that with practice.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't do that. I mean, truth is, nobody really goes and does whiteboard testing as their daily work. No one does that in school. No one does it in their job. That's why it's such a crappy way to approach. But I don't want to go down that path. The biggest thing is, if you're going to be put into situations time and time again, then you need to get your friends that are also somewhat in your field, or at least can represent an audience and code problems in front of them, so that you lower your anxiety, because the anxiety and tension rises when you do these things. Now, there's no doubt you must prepare for the test.
Yeah.
Going into any of these, one, like all the folks that do the FANG interviews, they constantly talk amongst themselves on various platforms about what the tests they saw. Prepare for them. Yeah. Like, there's just no excuse. You want to work at Google, you need to know what Google's giving people to test on. Is it cheating? I don't know, because the word is out there. Does Google think it's cheating?
Guide, right?
Yeah, like exactly. Like, I
They're
don't
still going to
know.
give you problems. You just need to know the area that you need to focus on. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And being prepared on that level, there's nothing that can replace that. But the other level is the anxiousness and the tension that a human being goes through when they have to do these problem solving things in front of others. And the more that you can practice and get past that level of nervousness, the better you'll think in these tests, and the better you'll present to the people in the like that are part of the audience.
Yeah.
And it's not something that just comes natural to anybody. Like, sure, I guess, yeah, there are people that they may have the vanity side that loves an audience. The engineering field is not full of that many extroverts that I've found, and it's the least happy thing that people do. But being prepared and then practicing problem solving in front of an audience to lower that anxiety you get are the top two things I would recommend to people. And everyone can get an audience. Like, people do if you say, I don't have enough people in my life that I can really, like, I would never bring my mom into one because she'd start just talking about other stuff, right? Let's say you don't have an audience immediately available. Go on Twitch. Yeah. Like, people are doing all sorts of things in their lives on video now. If anything can get you over a Zoom audience anxiety, it's going on Twitch and solving problems in front of a Twitch audience.
Yeah.
Like, that's the type of thing that I would start to do and focus on, is go after the anxiety aspect, be prepared. And there's plenty of tools available to be prepared. So that, like, we don't even need to go through that. It's understand that it's completely natural and normal for you to be anxious trying to solve problems in front of an interviewer, in front of an audience, in front of a room of people. If you want to do better, you have to practice it to bring down your heart rate. Like, if you got anything that can track your heart rate, watch, like, people, if you were to do an interview with somebody, your heart rate would spike.
Sure.
Like, your watch would know that you're going through that. Your goal is to, I'm going to practice this enough with an audience so that I get my heart rate at a normal pace when I'm doing these things. Your audience will see it, you will feel better, and you'll think more clear as you're solving problems. Absolutely. The worst thing I think I've always seen are smart people that lock up and freeze when they have an audience. And it's very subtle. Like, when I had students, I'd walk behind them and they couldn't type. All of a sudden their typing is going all over the place. They're like, I don't know what's wrong. I'm like, I'm standing here. That's what's wrong. That anxiety kicks in for me. Like, I'm no different. And I've been doing this forever, but I don't code in front of people all the time. Yeah. Like, it's completely different to have someone. My wife is now a front end engineer, and if I start coding in front of her, I start making typos that I've like, what the hell? Someone looking over your shoulder causes tension. Yeah. Or it causes a change of environment. If you want to do better at it, you have to practice it.
It's really the thesis of the show, right? Is through practice you can get better at this. And it's something that I'd never made the link to public speaking before, but it's funny you mentioned that. When I was in college, I think I had, a presentation I had to make, speaking at a church, and like basically 3 public speaking events in a row. And I was terrible. I couldn't talk in front of people at all. Yeah. And those went so poorly that I went, okay, I know this, it has to be possible to be better at this, right? I see people who are doing just fine. And so I went and, tried. And then a year later I was on an improv team that, performed weekly, and the change of over that time was literally just doing it, right? It still hurt the first 50 times I did it, and it was painful, but then eventually you get more and more used to it. And I think it's the same idea with this. The goal is, in my first technical interview, I forgot how to write a function, right? I was like, I know how to solve it. Was FizzBuzz, right? I was like, I know how to solve the problem, but I literally cannot write, like I can't build you a function right now, right? And I got through it, but it's something that
Yeah.
it's a practice thing, right? So I love to hear
So
that.
on the flip side, just to add, as an interviewer, I don't want to judge people on that anxiety. So my role, or if there's any interviewers or people that are going to be like, hopefully the people that are listening to this is an audience that will grow into a management role and can help improve these things later. Your job, or I should say, it behooves you to bring the anxiety level down in your interviews, not to raise it up. You're not trying to hire people that can code in front of an audience as their job.
Sure.
Like, that's not what I've never hired someone because I'm like, wow, man, you are smooth with VS Code when there's 4 people looking over your shoulder. Awesome. That's what I want. No, I want problem solvers that can work with other people, but I don't need people that like present code all day long. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's not what I'm trying to hire. So when I go into interviews, my immediate goal is to put the person at ease as much as I can. And there's only so much you can do, but don't raise the pressure on them. Smile, joke around, be nice, like be pleasant as an interviewer, be a good host, and make the person not feel like they are under the gun as part of your process. You want an honest answer from them, and honesty involves emotion. And I want them to feel comfortable answering questions, whether they're technical. So even if let's say I'm working for someone that tells me, you must give this person an algorithm, you must give this person FizzBuzz. I mean, I'd walk out anyway, but if I had to do it, I had no other choice. My first thing to this person would be like, hey, I know we're going to do, like, how comfortable are you with doing these? Like, I would just ask out flat out, how comfortable are you with doing like technical problems? And if they tell me they're not, I'm going to bring down the tension. I'm going to like tell them, stand up, take a big breath. You know, I want you to feel comfortable with this because I want you at your best. I don't want you, I'm not testing to see if you're like, are you anxious doing whiteboard interviews? That is not what I'm testing here. And it's up to the interviewer, and it's up to the future juniors that are moving up this ladder into future leadership roles. Think about that person's anxiety on the other side. The only way to, like, if they aren't prepared, if they haven't practiced, help them out. You want the best, you want them at their best, not at their worst. And so many people just seem to want to judge people on that whiteboard thing of like, whoa, they got so nervous. It's like, well, don't you think that was your fault? Perhaps not their fault. Like, that's how it works. So I think it does. I try to do that with everyone, especially when I notice that someone's nervous. Bring it down. Like, let's chill out. I'm not here. You don't need to feel anxious around me when we're talking. Most of the time it works. Sometimes I can't get past it. Like, the person is just full of nerves. But most of the time I have found I can make progress with folks by having empathy for the level of anxiety they have on the other side of the screen.
Yeah. Great. Well, before we move into a break and then our second half here, do you have any interviewing horror stories from either side of the table that you're willing to share?
Oh, yeah. So let's see. I interviewed with a education company in Chicago. I'm going to guess this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And they gave me a take-home test. It was a simple test. It was simple in the sense of I had done work like this before. And I didn't really want to do it, but I'm like, what the heck, I'll try it. And but then I procrastinated on it because I was busy. I was like doing a full-time job. And then really, like, that's the other thing about take-home tests. Like, you're asking people to do this in the evenings and stuff. And what if they got a full-time gig? You really expect them to blow their evenings on your stuff? But I went ahead and tried to do it. And the day I went down to the wire. Like, I got an extension, and then it was like homework in college or something. And that night, the power went out. This is up in Ravenswood. Power goes out. There was like the estimated time to get it back on was in that neighborhood sector was like 2 hours. So I had to go down I had to walk all the way down to a Starbucks. Full. It was a small Starbucks that was full. Yeah. And I'm trying to get this thing done on the Starbucks Wi-Fi, and it involved like GitHub, and I get in there and I'm like already burned an hour trying to find the right place to go to. And I just like, I have one chance to get this right. And I totally bombed that. And I just ended up sending them a pile of crap. And of course they rejected it. And I explained the scenario I went through, but I was like, this is stupid. Like, I've been doing, like, at this point, I've been in the business 13 years or so. But it was my experience enough with take homes to really realize that unless a person is unemployed, take home tests are a huge burden.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that most people are interviewing with like 5 or 6 other companies. So now they got 6 take home tests. Like, I'm expecting them to do all this stuff for me. I must really be working at this amazing place that expect them to do this time on their free time. Plus the fact that when I went and looked up Google, I found the test. I'm like, crap, I could have totally found the answer, you know. So that was one disaster. And then there was another one. Oh, there was another one where I remember I went in. I mean, and this is just my approach to all technology, I think. I have a good understanding of when you build things, the security holes that you need to look out for, cross-site scripting, all that. I don't have a really in-depth knowledge of it. I couldn't sit off here and ramble on every scenario and stuff and all the intricate details. Because when I get to that point, I follow best practices. I read up enough to know, have I covered the bases? Am I using a tool that can kind of analyze and maybe give me pointers on it? I'm not memorizing cross-site scripting. But one of the things that the interviewers in this test started doing was throwing explicit security hole questions my way to find out if I knew them. And I was just like, and I just kind of said at the end, I'm like, dudes, I'm just going to Google this. I don't know. I haven't memorized these things. I know what cross-site scripting is. I can explain it to you, but this is not the type of thing I memorize and know by heart. And they were just like taken aback that I would answer it that way. And it showed like that was the last technical interview I participated on where I'm like, these dudes just want to gotcha stuff on me.
Yeah.
And so those, like, they were bombs, but they're in a way, like, I was kind of annoyed for about an hour after each. And then I'm like, this is not how I want to work for companies, and I don't want to interview them that way. But most of the time, what happens that is not a disaster is people want to talk to me about projects, problems, people, scenarios. I can talk all day about what we ran into and how we got past it, how I approach research, how I approach problem solving, all that kind of stuff. But as soon as you get me into like the things, like I'm talking to you as someone that has worked past a lot of public speaking anxiety, someone who has worked past working on a whiteboard in front of folks. Mm-hmm. The anxiety still raises. My heart rate will still go up when I'm all of a sudden asked to do that. Now, it hasn't been a while that I've done it, but it is completely normal. And so in all those scenarios, whether it was doing a take-home test on a time kind of limited time basis or doing that specific security analysis those guys wanted to do, I still got anxious. I still was like, the tension rose, and when I felt myself failing, it got worse. It doesn't get better. So yeah, like I've been through the ringer on that, and looking back in hindsight, for the take-home test, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to block off half a day. Like, no excuse, in the middle of the day, not after hours, middle of the day. I have to take the time off from work or do it on a weekend. Block the time off, know what if I need Wi-Fi, know what my backup is, do the research to know, like, okay, what does this company typically do with their take-home tests? I could have found that out. I didn't look at it until after the fact. On the interview with the other company, if security is a big part of what they're doing, I didn't ask the HR person up front, what do they typically ask in these? If they had told me security and I really wanted to work there, I'm going to start researching a little bit more high detailed security stuff. It was Ruby on Rails, so it was an area that I already knew. And I would have been able to at least speak more coherently about security related things compared to, I just was like, I haven't looked at this stuff specifically in a long time. So again, I could have been better prepared for both of those scenarios than what I did.
Well, that's a key point, I think, is always looking back at interviews, regardless of how they went, and going, what could I learn from this experience, right? Because part of practicing is actually learning something from it. You know, there's one aspect of practice, just through repetition, you'll get better at something, but also looking at it critically and say, where was I successful? Where was I not successful? And what can I take from this? Right.
Exactly.
I like that a lot.
But I do, the other point there to make is, if you're going into an interview process, ask the people what to expect, and they will likely give you hints. Like, if they're that opaque, it's like, okay, maybe it's not a great candidate. Like, but someone that can tell you how to be ready is at least a help. Every inch matters. Every little nugget of information you can get going into this, it's just like problem solving. What can I get to help me get to the answer faster? Same thing. Talk to HR. Talk to your HR rep. Talk to the recruiter who's talked to other recruits. Talk to, if you're in an interview with someone and you really connect with them well, ask them, what am I in store for next? I've done that. I've definitely done that. And I get like, oh yeah, the next person, they're not very talkative, but they're pretty chill, and they'll ask you about this kind of stuff. I'm like, cool, great. That's all, but always be prodding for more information along the way. That's kind of the secret, I guess.
It's the study guide. The more prepped you can be, like, instead of going in knowing they could ask me about anything engineering or software development related, right? At least give me like a field to focus on, right? It just makes it so much easier for you. And it's a confidence thing if you go in feeling like, at least I have some idea, right? Like what I think they're going to ask, right? Versus just, we'll see. Great. Well, let's take our break here, and then when we come back, we'll move into the I'll say not technical portion. But,
FizzBuzz. We're doing FizzBuzz next, right?
Yeah. Thank you for watching the first half of the Professional Technical Interviewee. The technical interview will be released 1 week from this episode, so be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Taylor Dorsett, or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.